In 1916, the Boston Red Sox lost the best hitter on their roster before the season started. Tris Speaker, the greatest defensive center fielder in baseball, a career .340 hitter, a future Hall of Famer in his prime, was sold to the Cleveland Indians over a contract dispute. The press said the Red Sox were finished. The fans said the dynasty was over. 3 titles in 5 years, they said, and now this. The Red Sox won the World Series anyway. They won it with a pitching staff so dominant that losing Tris Speaker barely mattered. They won it with a 21-year-old left-hander who threw 9 shutouts, posted a 1.75 ERA, and beat Walter Johnson 4 times in a single season. A 21-year-old kid from a reform school in Baltimore who was the best pitcher in the American League and who also happened to be the best hitter on the pitching staff. A kid who had not yet figured out that he was better at hitting than pitching. A kid named Babe Ruth. This is the story of the 1916 Boston Red Sox, the team that won a championship without its best player, the team that showcased the greatest pitching staff of the dead ball era, and the team that stood at the peak of a dynasty without knowing that everything was about to collapse. Because after this season, the owner would sell the franchise. After this season, the new owner would sell Ruth. And after that, the Red Sox would not win another World Series for 86 years. The 1916 Red Sox were defending champions. They had won the World Series in 1915, beating the Philadelphia Phillies 4-1 behind a pitching staff that included Dutch Leonard, Ernie Shaw, Rube Foster, and a young left-hander named Ruth, who had been limited to a single pinch-hitting appearance in the series. The 1915 team had been built around 2 pillars, an elite outfield anchored by Tris Speaker and a deep, talented pitching rotation that could shut down any lineup in baseball. Speaker had been the heartbeat. He had played center field in Boston since 1907, roaming the outfield with an instinct and athleticism that made him the best defensive outfielder of his generation. He played shallow, impossibly shallow, positioning himself so close to the infield that he occasionally turned unassisted double plays from center field, a feat that sounds invented but was documented multiple times during his career. He hit .344 in 1912, the year the Red Sox won their second World Series. He hit .338 in 1913. He was a career .345 hitter at the time of the trade. He drove in runs, stole bases, and made catches that other fielders could not have reached at a full sprint. He was, alongside Ty Cobb and Honus Wagner, one of the 3 greatest players in baseball, and he was no longer a Red Sox. Then he held out for more money. Speaker had been making $18,000, an enormous salary for the era, but considerably less than he believed he deserved for a player of his caliber. He wanted a raise. Owner Joseph Lannin refused. Lannin was a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune in real estate and hotels, and he ran his baseball team with the same cold financial discipline he applied to his business empire. He believed no player was bigger than the franchise. Speaker believed he was. The negotiations turned hostile. Neither side budged. In April of 1916, with the season about to begin and Speaker still unsigned, Lannin made a decision that stunned the baseball world. He sold Speaker to the Cleveland Indians for approximately $50,000 in cash, plus 2 players, pitcher Sad Sam Jones and infielder Fred Thomas. It was the kind of trade that should have destroyed a franchise. Losing a player of Speaker's caliber in the prime of his career without receiving anything close to equal value in return is the sort of transaction that typically sends a team spiraling into irrelevance for years. The press predicted catastrophe. Sports writers in Boston and across the American League wrote the Red Sox off before they played a single game. The predictions were wrong. The Red Sox did not need Tris Speaker's bat to win the 1916 pennant. They needed their pitching staff to stay healthy. And their pitching staff was, from top to bottom, the most dominant collection of arms in the American League. Bill Carrigan was the manager, and he was the perfect man for the job. They called him Rough Bill because he was a former catcher who managed with the same toughness he had brought to the position. He did not tolerate laziness. He did not accept excuses. He ran his clubhouse with an iron hand, and his players respected him for it. Babe Ruth, who would go on to clash with almost every manager he ever played for, later called Carrigan the best manager I ever played for. That endorsement, from a man who was managed by Miller Huggins, Joe McCarthy, and a half-dozen others, tells you everything about Carrigan's ability to command a room full of professional athletes. Carrigan's pitching staff in 1916 was historically deep. 5 pitchers won 14 or more games with earned run averages below 2.85. The team earned run average was 2.48, the best in the American League. They allowed just 480 runs, the fewest in the league. In an era when pitching dominated baseball like it never has before or since, the Red Sox pitchers dominated the pitchers. The ace was Babe Ruth. He was 21 years old. He stood 6'2" and weighed 180 pounds. Not yet the barrel-chested giant he would become in his Yankees years, but already an imposing physical presence on the mound. He threw left-handed with a fastball that arrived in the high 80s and a curveball that broke sharply down and away from right-handed hitters. His delivery was smooth, almost lazy, hiding the violence of the pitch until the ball was already on top of the hitter. Ruth went 23-12 with a 1.75 ERA in 323 2/3 innings. He threw 9 shutouts, setting an American League record for left-handed pitchers that still stands more than 100 years later. No left-hander in the American League has thrown 9 shutouts in a season since 1916. The record has survived the live ball era, the expansion era, the steroid era, and the modern era of pitch counts and bullpen specialization. It will almost certainly never be broken. Opponents batted just .201 against him, the lowest opposing batting average in the American League. He led the league in ERA and finished 3rd in wins, innings pitched, and strikeouts with 170. But Ruth's pitching was only half the story. The other half was what he did with a bat in his hands. In an era when pitchers were expected to be automatic outs, Ruth batted .272. He hit 3 home runs in 3 consecutive games at one point during the season, a power surge that was extraordinary for any player in the dead ball era, let alone a pitcher. Carrigan used him as a pinch hitter 19 times during the season because Ruth's swing was too valuable to waste on the bench during games he did not pitch. The question hung in the air all season: should Ruth be moved to an everyday position? His bat was too good to use only every 5th day. His arm was too good to take off the mound. The dilemma was unprecedented. No player in baseball had ever been elite at both pitching and hitting at the same time. Carrigan chose to keep Ruth on the mound because the pitching staff needed him more than the lineup did. It was a reasonable decision. It was also the decision that prevented Ruth from becoming a full-time hitter 4 years earlier than he eventually did. What would have happened if Carrigan had moved Ruth to the outfield in 1916? Nobody knows. But the question is one of the great what-ifs in baseball history, right alongside what if Mantle had stayed healthy and what if Clemente had not boarded the plane. The numbers were staggering for any pitcher at any age. For a 21-year-old in his 2nd full season, they were almost incomprehensible. Ruth was not developing into a great pitcher. He was not projecting as a future ace. He was already there. He had arrived at the summit of his profession at an age when most pitchers are still learning how to set up hitters and navigate a major league lineup for the 2nd time around. The most remarkable evidence of Ruth's dominance in 1916 was his season-long duel with Walter Johnson, the greatest pitcher in baseball history. Ruth faced Johnson head-to-head 4 times that year and won all 4. He beat Johnson 5-1 in their first meeting. He beat him 1-0 on June 1st in a game so tightly contested that American League President Ban Johnson, who was in attendance, called it one of the best ball games he had ever seen. He beat Johnson 1-0 again in a 13-inning epic where both pitchers threw complete games, and the outcome was decided by a single run scratched across in the bottom of the 13th. He beat him 2-1 in their 4th meeting. 4 games, 4 wins. 4 times the 21-year-old kid from Baltimore outpitched the most feared arm in baseball. Johnson was 38-7 in 1913, had won 12 20-win seasons, and was widely considered untouchable. Ruth touched him, Ruth beat him, and Ruth did it with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, as if defeating the greatest pitcher alive was simply what he expected to do on a Tuesday afternoon. Behind Ruth, the staff was equally formidable. Dutch Leonard went 18-12 with a 2.36 ERA. Leonard had set the all-time single-season ERA record just 2 years earlier, posting a 0.96 in 1914, a number so absurd that it has never been seriously challenged. He was a left-hander with pinpoint control and a temperament that coaches described as difficult but effective. He did not care if his teammates liked him. He cared about getting outs. Carl Mays went 18-13 with a 2.39 ERA. Mays threw from a submarine delivery, releasing the ball from a point so low that it appeared to come from the dirt. Right-handed hitters could not pick up his sinker. Left-handed hitters fared slightly better, but still struggled with the unorthodox angle. Mays was a surly, combative man who was disliked by teammates and opponents alike. 4 years later, in 1920, he would throw the pitch that killed Ray Chapman of the Cleveland Indians, the only on-field fatality in Major League Baseball history. But in 1916, he was simply one of the best pitchers in the American League, winning 18 games for a team that expected nothing less. Ernie Shaw went 16-10 with a 2.63 ERA. Shaw was the steadiest arm on the staff, the pitcher Carrigan trusted for the biggest regular season games and the one he would hand the ball to for Games 1 and 5 of the World Series. The previous season, Shaw had pitched a perfect game in relief of Ruth, who had been ejected after walking the first batter and punching the umpire. Shaw retired all 26 batters he faced. It remains one of the most unusual pitching performances in baseball history. Rube Foster rounded out the rotation at 14-8 with a 2.82 ERA. Foster was not a star. He was a workhorse, a reliable arm who took the ball every fifth day and gave his team a chance to win. He would pitch the pivotal Game 3 of the World Series and hand the Robins their only victory, but his consistency during the regular season was what made the rotation so deep. 5 pitchers, 14 or more wins each. ERAs ranging from 1.75 to 2.82. No weak link, no easy matchup. Every fifth day, the opposing team faced an arm that could shut them down, and the Red Sox never ran out of options. The offense was modest by comparison. Without Speaker, the Red Sox scored 550 runs, a respectable but unremarkable total. Tilly Walker replaced Speaker in center field and hit .266. Roughly 80 points lower than Speaker had averaged over his Boston career. The gap was enormous. Walker was a competent outfielder. He was not Tris Speaker. Larry Gardner was the team's best hitter, batting .308 with 62 runs batted in from the third base position. Harry Hooper, the Hall of Fame right fielder, hit .271 and provided elite defense and veteran leadership. Duffy Lewis, the left fielder who had formed the legendary Golden outfield alongside Hooper and Speaker, hit .268. Dick Hoblitzell played first base and hit .244. Jack Barry played second base. Everett Scott played shortstop and quietly began a consecutive games played streak that would eventually reach 1,307, the record that Lou Gehrig would break a decade later. The lineup was functional. It was not fearsome, it did not need to be. When your pitching staff allows fewer runs than any team in the league, your offense only needs to be good enough. The 1916 Red Sox were good enough. Barely, but enough. The team got off to a slow start, adjusting to Speaker's absence and struggling to generate runs with a lineup that missed its most dangerous bat. Ruth won his first 4 starts and kept the team afloat during the early weeks when the offense could not find its rhythm. Even during the worst stretches, when the Red Sox went through batting slumps that lasted weeks, Ruth usually pitched and hit well enough to win by himself. By midsummer, the pitching had stabilized everything. The staff was so dominant that opposing teams approached games against Boston the way armies approach fortified positions, with caution, low expectations, and the hope that something lucky might happen. Nothing lucky happened often enough. The Red Sox climbed into first place on September 18th and held it for the rest of the season, finishing 2 games ahead of the Chicago White Sox, whose own 90-win season would have been good enough to win the pennant in most other years. The pennant clinch was not dramatic. There was no final day showdown, no winner-take-all series against a rival. The Red Sox simply ground their opponents down over 154 games with a pitching staff that never cracked and a lineup that scored just enough runs to make the pitching stand up. It was not exciting baseball, it was effective baseball, and Bill Carrigan would have taken effective over exciting every single day. The World Series matched the Red Sox against the Brooklyn Robins, the National League champions who had won 94 games under manager Wilbert Robinson. The Robins were named after Robinson himself, a jovial, round former catcher who had coached under John McGraw with the Giants before taking over in Brooklyn. Robinson had assembled a talented roster built around a mix of veterans and emerging stars. The Brooklyn lineup featured Zach Wheat, a Hall of Fame left fielder who hit .312 during the regular season and was the best all-around hitter on either roster. Jake Dorbert played first base and hit .316, providing consistent offense at the top of the order. George Cutshaw played second base and drove in 63 runs, the most on the team. The pitching staff was anchored by Jeff Pfeffer, who went 25-11 with a 1.92 ERA, numbers that would have led most staffs in baseball, but that were overshadowed by the collective dominance of Boston's rotation. The Robins also had a 26-year-old outfielder from Kansas City named Casey Stengel, who had hit .279 during the regular season and who played with a colorful intensity that belied his modest statistics. Stengel would go on to manage the New York Yankees to 10 pennants and 7 World Series championships, including 5 consecutive titles from 1949 through 1953. But in 1916, he was just a young outfielder trying to prove he belonged. And in the other dugout sat Rube Marquard, the left-handed pitcher who had won 26 consecutive decisions for the Giants in 1912 and who was now pitching for Brooklyn. Marquard had faced the Red Sox in the 1912 World Series. He would face them again now, 4 years later, in a different uniform. The Red Sox played their home games at Braves Field rather than Fenway Park. The reason was straightforward economics. Braves Field, home of the National League's Boston Braves, held approximately 40,000 fans. Fenway Park held roughly 27,000. More seats meant more ticket revenue. Owner Lannin was not sentimental about home addresses as long as the money came through the door. The decision paid off handsomely throughout the series, culminating in a then-record crowd of 42,620 for Game 5. Game 1 set the tone for the series. Ernie Shaw started for Boston against Rube Marquard, the Brooklyn left-hander who had once won 26 consecutive decisions for the New York Giants, and who had also pitched against the Red Sox in the 1912 World Series. Shaw was steady but not dominant, and the game turned into a back-and-forth slugfest that was unusual for the dead ball era. The Red Sox built an early lead behind a 3-run third inning, but Brooklyn chipped away. In the 9th inning, the Robins erupted for 4 runs and had the tying run standing on second base with only 1 out. Shaw bore down, retired the next 2 batters, and Boston escaped with a 6-5 victory. 15,000 fans standing outside the Boston Herald offices on Tremont Street following the game via telegraph erupted when the final out was announced through a megaphone. The game was sloppy, dramatic, and exhausting. It was also a warning to Brooklyn. The Red Sox were not going to fold, even without Tris Speaker. Game 2 was the masterpiece. Ruth took the mound against Brooklyn's Sherry Smith, a left-hander who had gone 14-10 with a 2.34 earned run average during the regular season. Both pitchers were brilliant. The game became a war of attrition, each side scraping for runs that refused to come. Brooklyn scored first. In the top of the first inning, center fielder Hy Myers drove a ball into the gap in right center field that split the outfielders and rolled to the fence. Myers raced around the bases for an inside-the-park home run. The Robins led 1-0, and the crowd of 41,373 at Braves Field fell silent. Ruth settled down. He retired the next batter and worked out of the inning. In the bottom of the third, the Red Sox tied the game on a groundout by Ruth himself that scored Everett Scott from third. The score was 1-1. It would stay 1-1 for a very long time. For the next 11 innings, neither team could score. Ruth and Smith matched each other pitch for pitch, inning after inning, in one of the greatest pitching duels in World Series history. Ruth did not allow another hit after the 8th inning. Smith kept the Red Sox off the scoreboard with a mix of curveballs and off-speed pitches that Boston's hitters could not square up. The game entered the 14th inning. Ruth had been on the mound for over 2 hours. He had thrown well over 150 pitches. His arm should have been dead. It was not. He set Brooklyn down 1, 2, 3 in the top of the 14th, his third consecutive scoreless frame. In the bottom of the 14th, Dick Hoblitzell drew a walk off Smith, the fourth time Hoblitzell had walked in the game. Carrigan sent Mike McNally in to pinch run. Duffy Lewis sacrificed McNally to second. Then Carrigan made a bold decision. He pulled Larry Gardner, his best hitter, and sent up Del Gaynor, a backup who had hit .254 during the regular season, to pinch hit. Gardner had been struggling in the series, going 1 for 9, and Carrigan trusted the right-handed Gaynor against the left-handed Smith. Gaynor lined a single into left field. McNally raced around third and scored. The Red Sox won 2-1 in 14 innings. It was the longest World Series game ever played, a record that would stand for decades. Ruth had pitched all 14 innings. He had allowed 6 hits and 1 run. After giving up the inside-the-park homer to Myers in the first inning, he had thrown 13 consecutive scoreless innings. That streak would continue into the 1918 World Series, eventually reaching 29 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in October, a record that stood for 43 years until Whitey Ford broke it in 1961. Sports writer Grantland Rice captured the performance in the next morning's paper, writing that for 14 innings, Boston's defense formed a long, wide wall of steel and stone behind Babe Ruth, and against this wall, Brooklyn rebounded to her second defeat. Game 3 moved to Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, the intimate bandbox in Flatbush, where the Robins faithful packed the wooden stands and screamed for their team. The Robins finally broke through, winning 4-3 behind veteran pitcher Jack Coombs, a former Philadelphia Athletics star who had won 31 games in 1910. Casey Stengel went 2 for 4 and played well in the outfield, running down fly balls with an energy that would become his trademark as a player and later as a manager. Brooklyn's fans celebrated as if they had won the series. They had not. They had won a stay of execution. Game 4 returned to Ebbets Field, and the Red Sox snuffed out Brooklyn's momentum immediately. Dutch Leonard pitched a complete game, scattering 5 hits and allowing 2 runs. Larry Gardner and Dick Hoblitzell drove in key runs, and the Red Sox won 6-2. The series lead was now 3-1. Brooklyn needed to win 3 straight, all against a pitching staff that had allowed more than 5 runs exactly once in 4 games. Game 5 went back to Braves Field for the finale, and Ernie Shaw delivered the knockout. He pitched a complete game, allowing 7 hits and 1 run. The Red Sox won 4-1 in front of the record crowd of 42,620, the largest gathering ever to witness a World Series game. When the final out was recorded, the Red Sox were world champions for the 4th time in their history, the 3rd time in 5 years, and the 2nd consecutive year. The dynasty was at its peak. What nobody in that Braves Field crowd could have known was that the celebration they were witnessing was the beginning of the end. Not the end of the season, which was over. Not the end of the dynasty, which would produce one more championship in 1918. But the end of the organization that had built the dynasty. The end of the front office, the ownership, and the managerial leadership that had turned the Boston Red Sox into the most successful franchise in baseball. After the World Series, Bill Carrigan retired from managing. He was 33 years old. He had won back-to-back World Series championships in 1915 and 1916 and had compiled a record of 489 wins and 500 losses across 4 seasons. He was exhausted by the demands of managing professional athletes, tired of the travel, and ready to return to his banking and business interests in Lewiston, Maine. Ruth took the news hard. Carrigan had been more than a manager to Ruth. He had been a disciplinarian, a mentor, and a father figure. The latest in a series of older men who had tried to impose structure on a young man who resisted structure in every aspect of his life, except pitching. Carrigan understood when to push Ruth and when to leave him alone. He understood when to let him hit and when to keep him on the mound. He understood that the 21-year-old kid from St. Mary's was both the most talented player he had ever managed and the most difficult. Without Carrigan, the Red Sox cycled through managers who could not handle Ruth's personality or harness his talent with the same precision. Ed Barrow, who took over in 1918, eventually made the decision to move Ruth to the outfield, unlocking the greatest hitter in baseball history. But Barrow also could not keep Ruth in Boston, and neither could Harry Frazee, who was too busy losing money on Broadway to care about keeping a left-handed pitcher who wanted to hit. Joseph Lannin also departed. He sold the Red Sox after the 1916 season to a group led by Harry Frazee, a New York theatrical producer who knew more about Broadway than baseball. Frazee was a showman who had made his fortune producing plays and musicals in Manhattan. He bought the Red Sox not because he loved baseball, but because he believed a championship franchise was a good investment. He was wrong. The team was expensive to operate, the revenues were inconsistent, and Frazee's theatrical ventures were hemorrhaging money. By 1919, Frazee was drowning in debt. His Broadway productions were failing. His creditors were circling. He needed cash desperately, and the most valuable asset he owned was a 24-year-old left-hander who had hit 29 home runs that season and was demanding a $20,000 salary. In January of 1920, Harry Frazee sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for $100,000 in cash and a $300,000 loan secured by a mortgage on Fenway Park itself. Frazee used the money to finance a Broadway musical called No, No, Nanette, which became a hit. The Red Sox used the next 86 years to regret every dollar of the transaction. It was the most catastrophic deal in the history of American sports. Ruth went to New York and hit 54 home runs in his first season as a Yankee. He hit 714 for his career. He built Yankee Stadium. He won 7 pennants and 4 World Series. He became the most famous athlete on earth. And the franchise that had produced him, developed him, and turned him into a star received $100,000 and a loan that was eventually paid off with interest. The curse of the Bambino lasted 86 years. From 1918, when the Red Sox won their last pre-curse championship with Ruth still on the roster, through 2004, when they finally broke through with a miraculous comeback from 3 games to none against the Yankees in the American League Championship Series, followed by a sweep of the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series, Boston did not win a single championship. They came close. They came agonizingly, heartbreakingly, soul-crushingly close. They lost the 1946 World Series to the Cardinals when Enos Slaughter scored from first on a single in Game 7. They lost the 1967 World Series to the Cardinals again. They lost the 1975 World Series to the Cincinnati Reds, despite Carlton Fisk's legendary home run in Game 6. They lost the 1986 World Series to the New York Mets when a ground ball rolled through Bill Buckner's legs in Game 6, producing the most infamous error in baseball history and a collapse that haunted an entire city for a generation. All of it, every heartbreak, every near miss, every what-if, traced back to one man, Harry Frazee, the theatrical producer who bought the Red Sox from Joseph Lannin after the 1916 season and then sold the greatest player in baseball history to finance a musical. The chain of events began in 1916. Lannin sold Speaker. Lannin sold the team. Frazee bought the team. Frazee sold Ruth. The dominoes fell across decades, each one toppling the next, until 86 years had passed and the curse of the Bambino had become the most famous hex in American sports. The 1916 Red Sox did not know any of this. They did not know they were standing on the edge of a cliff. They thought they were building something permanent. 3 titles in 5 years. The best pitching staff in baseball. A 21-year-old ace who was only getting better. They had every reason to believe the dynasty would continue. It did for 2 more years. The Red Sox won the World Series again in 1918, with Ruth pitching and playing the outfield, hitting 11 home runs during the regular season and beginning the transformation from pitcher to hitter that would change baseball forever. But that 1918 title was the last one. After that, the sale. After the sale, the curse. After the curse, 86 years of heartbreak. The 1916 Boston Red Sox won 91 games and a World Series championship with a pitching staff that featured 5 arms with earned run averages under 2.85, anchored by a 21-year-old left-hander who threw 9 shutouts, beat Walter Johnson 4 straight times, and pitched 14 masterful innings in a World Series game that remains one of the greatest pitching performances in October history. They lost Tris Speaker, a future Hall of Famer in the prime of his career, and it did not matter. They played their home World Series games in someone else's stadium, a mile from Fenway Park, and it did not matter. They were managed by a man who would retire at 33 and replaced by men who would dismantle everything he built. And that mattered enormously, but not yet. Not in 1916. In 1916, everything still worked. The kid on the mound was 21. He threw 9 shutouts. He beat Walter Johnson 4 times. He pitched 14 innings in the World Series and won. He batted .272 and hit home runs in 3 consecutive games. He was the best pitcher in the American League, and nobody yet suspected he might also be the best hitter. 4 years later, he would be a Yankee. 4 years later, the curse would begin. But in October of 1916, Babe Ruth was still a Red Sox. The dynasty was still alive, and the greatest player in baseball history was still just a pitcher. Nobody knew what was coming. Nobody ever does. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.